Grammar, one of the essential pillars of languages. Knowing how the grammar of a language works can turn a word list like this into successful communication with other people. The opinions on whether you should study grammar or not, how much you should study, and the best strategy for studying grammar are quite divided. Some people love their grammar studies, so much even that they'll willingly spend all their time on studying grammar, looking at conjugation tables, learning prepositions, and sentence patterns. Others might hate grammar. They might have already clicked away the moment that I mentioned the word. I'm here today to share 3 different approaches to learning grammar. Whether you hate grammar or love it, I'm sure that one of these approaches can be adapted to fit your learning style and learning preferences. I think the first approach is well known by pretty much everyone, and it is the number 1 reason why people hate grammar so much. And that is just getting a grammar book or a grammar guide and studying the grammar as you move along your studies. This method usually includes drilling verb conjugation tables, memorizing the different sentence patterns, and learning about how verbs, adjectives, and nouns interact in a sentence, while at the same time doing grammar exercises as you go along. This approach is criticized a lot, but I want to take a moment to talk about the benefits and why in some cases it might even be necessary to study grammar this way before we move on to the second approach. I'm sure we can all agree that memorizing sentence patterns and staring at verb conjugation tables is not the most exciting thing in the world, but believe it or not, it gets the job of getting those conjugations drilled inside your head done pretty well. Especially followed by exercises, you can be sure to have memorized those conjugation patterns, given that you actually put in some effort when studying, and you'll be able to access them easier, since you can actively retrieve the information instead of just passively understanding it. Why would this be necessary, you may wonder? Well, in conversation, you don't really get a lot of time to think about the different verb conjugations and grammar patterns before it gets awkward. So having a really fast, almost automatic response time is crucial. Cramming grammar alone is obviously not going to get you to that level of mastery of the language, and you should never be studying just grammar, but it is a really good first step towards that level. That's why I think this approach is especially good for people who plan on speaking pretty soon. If you plan on moving to your target language country, for example, it could be pretty useful to know how questions are formed. And I think this approach can also be useful for people who have only been inputting until now, but do plan on outputting in the future. Okay, let's move on to the second approach. This second approach is pretty much the exact opposite of what I just presented to you. It is for people who do not care about speaking, who don't care about writing or output in general, but just want to be lazy and understand their immersion material better while not bothering with boring grammar sessions. Coincidentally, this approach is probably the most prominent in the immersion learning community, and it is just looking things up as you go. You pretty much just let your interests guide you, and if there is a sentence that you find interesting and you kind of understand but not really, you look the grammar aspects of that sentence up. Then as you move along, you just piece things together as you see fit. Depending on what material you consume, the grammar that you will be looking up will differ greatly from courses or textbooks. Mixing basic grammar with intermediate and advanced grammar pretty early on. You might also learn about grammar that is either very specific to a certain type of media. For example, if you read a lot, you'll probably come across a lot of grammar that can rather be found in written media than in spoken form, or very colloquial types of abbreviations, for example, in shows. Or grammar that is typical for a certain type of character, for example, how the bad guy talks or how the cute dumb blonde talks, and so on. This approach can be really useful once you have a basic understanding of the grammar, once you understand how sentence structure works and how the verbs conjugate, because it allows you to understand the majority of what's going on, and then just looking the things up that you're interested in or that you want to have a deeper understanding of. I would, however, not recommend this approach to beginners who have very little grammar understanding and intuition of how the language works, because pretty much every single sentence will just have a tad too much grammar information in it for you to comfortably understand what's going on. Okay, moving on to the last approach before I give you some advice on how I would recommend someone to learn grammar. The third approach really is a combination of the first and the second approach. For this one, you'll also need a grammar guide or a textbook, and then you front load a lot of the grammar that is in that book, just like in the first approach. The difference is that you don't memorize every single aspect, every single sentence pattern, and every conjugation. Instead, you'll just take your time to read through the grammar explanations, looking at some of the example sentences, and just getting an idea of what that grammar is about. And that's it. The goal here is to make the grammar look somewhat familiar to you, not to perfectly memorize it. The next step then would be to go out and read and listen to things while looking out for those grammar patterns. If you encounter one and you can remember what it is from your mini study session, then that's great, because you just created a stronger connection to that grammar pattern. And if you see one that looks vaguely familiar but you can't quite remember what it is about, you can just go back and look it up again, refreshing that memory. This approach is great to kickstart or improve your comprehension without necessarily having to sit through hour-long study sessions. Especially in the beginning, this approach is great because you can start jumping right into the fun stuff while already having a basic understanding of what's going on. Okay, now that we know about the different approaches, and I'm sure there are so many more out there, but I think these three are the most used ones, let's talk about which of these three is the best. You might have noticed, but each of these approaches fits a different learning style and serves a different purpose, so that there is no one approach that is best for every situation. The truth is, I believe that a combination of these three is the best way to learn grammar. I think ideally you would start out with the third approach, getting a basic idea of how the language that you're trying to learn works. Do they have grammatical gender? What is the sentence structure like? Do verbs conjugate? And so on. How extensively you want to do that depends on your preference, but I think that this is a really good first step. At this point, you should not be focused on gaining a perfect understanding of every single grammar aspect, but just enough so that a lot of them look familiar to you. And then as you read or as you watch, you come across these things that already look familiar to you, and you get to strengthen the memory that you have of them and to build deeper knowledge of all the different nuances that that grammar point might have, while also discovering new things. And this is where the second approach comes into play. You just start learning new things as you go without having studied them before. This is probably the most effective once you have reached the upper intermediate stages, because at that point you'll probably have a good enough basic grammar understanding so that not everything you come across is completely new. This is, I think, where the first approach also starts being effective, because it trains the ability to activate the knowledge that you might have stored but can't really access. It helps set the foundation for that automated information retrieval that is so important for speaking. As you can see, no one method is the best. They serve different purposes that are important at different times, so a combined approach is usually what will yield the best results. I hope this video was insightful. Let me know in the comments which approach you are currently using to study grammar, or if you maybe have a completely different approach. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you!